What's up, guys? Just wanted to help everybody out here with some settings in Halo Infinite to improve gameplay and the smoothness a bit. So if you go down to the settings once you've launched the game and click on settings again, go to video. Now you'll see quite a few options here. So one of the first things I'll point out is the field of view. So if you're on PC, this might be an option on console, but for PC, I typically play between 90 and 100. Anything higher than that, and it does my aim does suffer a bit. It does take a little bit of getting used to, but the advantage to this is that you get more peripheral vision, so you see when enemies pop into your screen off the edges a little bit sooner. If you're rounding corners, you'll catch a glimpse of them quite a bit early. It does help. So borderless full screen seems to be the way to go. It allows you to drag your mouse over if you have two screens. Definitely runs smooth for me. I haven't had any issues with this. Your resolution scale, so you can run higher than your native resolution of your monitor. You really just want this to be at 100%. It'll auto detect whatever your resolution is. If you're playing on a 1080p monitor, 1920 by 1080 should be 100%. If you're playing on 2560 by 1440, which is what I'm at, that'll be 100% for me. Minimum frame rate, so I typically leave this off if a game offers it. It's adaptive resolution, and what it does is it adjusts the resolution to meet a target FPS, a minimum FPS. So if you never want it to dip below 60 or 100 or something along those lines, you can put that number in there and it will do everything it can to try to never dip below that. Can be helpful if you have more basic PC or if you're playing on a laptop. It's a nice feature, but if you have a decent rig, I wouldn't worry about it too much. The next thing would be the maximum frame rate. So you really want this to be set to the resolution or the refresh rate of your monitor. So if you have a 120 hertz or a 144 hertz monitor, you would want to set this to 144. If you're pumping out frames higher than your monitor's max refresh rate, they're kind of wasted. You're putting an extra workload on your GPU and your CPU to more specifically your CPU, so it'll run slightly hotter if you're pumping out way more frames than you actually can take advantage of. So might as well set that at the max refresh rate of your monitor. If you have a 60 hertz monitor, you would want to set that to 60. Again, just pointless to run anything higher than that, and it should never dip below that if you have these next settings set to something fairly reasonable. So I've got a combination of medium and high. This seems to be able to allow me to play at 144 hertz locked, with occasional dips below like 120 into like the low 100 range, especially in big team battles, but for the most part it stays right at 144 FPS. I believe by default this is enabled up in the corner, but you can turn this on where it tracks your ping and your FPS counter in the corner, and you can watch that and see if the game doesn't feel like it's running smooth or it's choppy. Could be because of low FPS or bad ping. So what you'd want to do if it's low FPS, maybe lower these settings, down to medium or low. Try that out, see if that helps. And if you're really still struggling, then maybe it's time to turn on this minimum frame rate, and this will adapt to the resolution automatically. But there will be times where it might look rough, so just brace yourself for that feature. So, but it should help it run smoother if you're having trouble. All right, so let's move on to mouse settings. So something that I've discovered, actually other people have discovered this, but I've just used this trick because it's extremely helpful. If you type in mouse settings in the start menu, open this window, go over to additional mouse options, and click on pointer options. There is this enhanced pointer precision checkbox. So this is enabled by default. You definitely want this off. Now, it might take you a couple hours to get used to it in Windows when you're clicking on things, because what it does is it stops the slowdown when you are approaching something that you can click on. It's not very noticeable, but it does feel a little weird at first in Windows. However, when you're gaming, there's no more acceleration. There's nothing influencing your mouse movement whatsoever. So turning this off helps you stay uniform in your aim, and it helps you dial in your sensitivity a lot easier. So definitely turn that off. And if you have a mouse with DPI settings, which most do, what you want to do is set it to somewhere in the range of 12 to 1500. Now, in doing this, if you're used to playing at 4 to 800, something in that range. Some people like really low DPI so they can move their mouse across the whole mouse pad. I've heard that it helps with muscle memory, being able to do flick shots and things like that with low DPI. However, recently quite a few people have pointed out that if you raise your DPI, you actually get less input lag, and what that does is reduces input lag by anywhere between 10 and 20 milliseconds. That doesn't seem like a lot, but it's a pretty big difference. It's a matter of, hitting a click right when you have it on their head and being past them already, or vice versa. So it can make a big difference. Now, what you'll need to do though is in game and with other games that you may play with a mouse, you'll have to lower the sensitivity quite a bit. So if you go from 800 to 1500, for example, you may need to cut your sensitivity by 30 to 40%, but take some time and dial it in. There's a great practice mode where you can shoot at targets and stuff. Highly recommend doing this. It's pretty noticeable if you have a low DPI and a higher sensitivity versus a high DPI, low sensitivity. Definitely take a look at that. It's helpful. I'll put a link in the description for a video from Optimum Tech where he goes into detail with high-speed camera and this machine that automates mouse movement so that it's very uniform and all of his tests are exactly the same. And it does make a pretty good difference. So frames win games, as NVIDIA says, and honestly, input lag is a big deal too. So. One more thing, now I don't have the setting pulled up right now, but keyboards can also have polling rate settings. So something you're going to want to do is just double check your keyboard settings if you have the software installed for it. I have a GMMK Pro, which is made by Glorious PC Gaming, and by default it has over 20 milliseconds of input lag, but they just did a firmware update recently where you can actually lower the input lag to around 10.5 milliseconds, which is still pretty high for a wired keyboard, but it's much better than what it is out of the box. And that you're basically switching the polling rate from, I think it was 250 to 1000, and it makes a really big difference. So when you strafe, for example, I don't have a camera hooked up, but when you strafe, it's noticeable when it's above 20 milliseconds. When you're hitting W to go forward and then A and D to move left and right, there's a bit of a delay, and when it's down in the 10 millisecond range, it's nearly instant. Most gaming keyboards, though, like from Logitech and Razer, are below 5 milliseconds, so you typically don't have to worry about this. But if you have a third-party keyboard or a custom one, for example, like a mechanical keyboard, then just take that into consideration. All right. Thanks, everybody.